everyone, and welcome to my lecture on how the economy should work. Now, I mean should work because it rarely ever works out this way. But it's really good to know the first ideal functioning of the economy so then we can understand when things go wrong, what part of this kind of sequence breaks down. So first we'll start with what works really, really well. Okay, so let's imagine over here that all of you just graduated. So here's you, and here's your wonderful diploma, says UGA, and everybody just graduated and instantly got hired. Congratulations, you're hired. So let's say every single one of you was hired. That's 100% full employment. Now, in reality, that's almost impossible for an entire economy to have full employment. It would be, what makes that impossible is that you ultimately aren't robots. And so at a given time when there's a demand for a certain job, it takes a while. If, let's say, I was teaching, but the real demand for the job that needed to be filled was no more teachers, but instead nurses. Imagine the amount of time that if I were to want to be a nurse, I would have to go back to school and learn to retrain to be a nurse. So there's a little bit of lag between supply of a workforce and the demand for it. Now, when we all are replaced by robots, robots could simply be reprogrammed much sooner and then turn around and do the next job. But right now, you generally need to think about it that about 95% is considered to be great full employment levels. So the benefit of having full employment is, of course, when we all do jobs, we get money for it. So imagine all of you have full employment, then you would start seeing an income, a salary coming through your bank account. So this would lead to what's called an increase in the money supply. Okay? And I sometimes find it easy to think about it as if everybody that was hired for a job would receive all of their money in cash in a big suitcase. But don't let your employer actually pay you this way. It's not a very good way to be paid. But imagine, for an example, that everybody in the classroom all had jobs and all was sitting next to them in this classroom was a suitcase filled with money. Right? The money supply in this classroom increases as there's more people being hired. Okay? So in an ideal economy, full employment would then lead to an increase. Here we have an increase in the money supply. Okay? Well, as there's an increase in the money supply, we see the next step in the economy and the economic kind of machine and how it works is an increase in demand for goods. I always think about this visually as kind of a wish list. Now, demand for goods, when they're talking about it in economic terms, doesn't just mean I would really like something, but a demand for goods means that I would like something, and because of my great new job and the salary I have, I'm able to actually go out and buy it. So, as you might imagine, the more money that's in supply in a given classroom or in a given economy, the more likely people are to start demanding going out and actually purchasing things that they like. Take, for example, that your best friend says that she wants to go on a vacation, or he wants to go on a vacation with you to Mexico. Okay? If you didn't have this nice new job, and you didn't have, therefore, a lot of money in your bank account, and you didn't have access to credit cards or any other nice aunts that want to give you birthday money to go to Mexico, any kind of access to it, then you probably would not be able to go to Mexico. However, if you actually find that you have this new job, more money, then you could potentially go out and not just have on your wish list this Mexican trip, but actually be able to get that trip, to go on that trip, all right? So this is what happens in the economy, is that as we have greater money supply, the demand for goods starts to increase as well. Okay, so for all of these, let me use a different color. For all of these, you'll start to see that as full employment goes up, then there's an increase in the money supply, which leads to an increase in demand. All right. Really, the only negative to this to this process is the next part, and it's not that bad. Is you'll also see then, here's a price tag. We'll put a price tag, and we'll say that the only thing that's really negative about this, how the economy should work in an ideal situation, is that as the demand goes higher for goods, people that are selling those goods are going to get smart about it. Let's say there was a tiny little town in Mexico that your friend knew about and said, come with me to this tiny little town, only locals go there. Well, you'll find that maybe the price for a given hotel in that tiny town is quite reasonable, right? But then let's imagine that you and your friend had such a good time at this hotel. You come back and you put on all your social media these beautiful pictures of your time in Mexico, and all of a sudden you and all of your friends and their families decide that they all want to go to this place. Well, you'll start to see that the hotel should get smart about this and realize that as there's an increase in the demand for their good or for their a stay at their wonderful hotel, the price will also increase as well. Okay, so you'll start to see the price increases as well. Now, this is not necessarily a problem for you, especially as you have that wonderful new job, and over time, as prices increase, as they do in the economy, even a well-functioning, especially actually a well-functioning economy, you will find that it's not a big deal so long as they only increase a little bit. And the ideal amount of increase people have found is about 2 to 3% a year or annually. And that suggests, for example, that as, and this is called, first I'll title it, is called price inflation. And oftentimes we hear of inflation as a bad thing. Typically, it is a bad thing if, in fact, you go higher than 2 to 3%. That's when it starts to get frustrating. So price inflation is not necessarily a bad thing if, in fact, it stays within this moderate increase from year to year. Take this example. Let's imagine that the hotel that you were going to in Mexico the first time you went was about $100 a night. Okay? And let's say that you and your friend had such a good time that you decided that you were going to make this an annual trip. All right? And again, you're enjoying this great job and you think that you're doing well, you think your boss likes you, so you're likely to probably have this job next year and be able to to book that trip each year. The next year, let's say you go back and it actually now is $102 a night or $103 a night. Do you think you would complain? Do you think you would say, we're not staying here, we're finding another place? Probably not. And that's exactly because whereas there's an inflation in the price does go higher, it's only such a little bit that it doesn't really hit you so hard. Now, there are some cases, as we'll talk about later, where it's called hyperinflation, where let's say the price of that hotel goes from $100 to $120 or $130 from year to year. And that's when you start to see a problem. The last part of this sequence is I already touched on, but is the idea that you will continue to not mind prices going higher. So let's say the third year you go on your trip, right, it would then be $104 or even $105, that you would not mind this price inflation and you would continue to go on your trip so long as the chain, this prices can go higher so long as you are able to continue to have your job and ideally even get raises in your job that will then make it so that you will be able to pay these prices going forward. So this is basically a summary of how the economy should work. Going forward, we'll talk about how in reality you rarely see it working as well as this.